Pete Towson's birthday as well as Memorial Day. If you're following our journey out on Facebook and on Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram, you know we were running around the Rocky Mountains, and the Orioles were falling down the mountain here the last couple weeks before the Yankees came to town. Luke, I know it's a Chicken Little society here, especially when you start taking bad turns. Pitching wasn't well. We know the hitting wasn't well, but so far so good this week, at least for getting home against the Yankees. And now here come the Red Sox. The Orioles are holding their own, but they certainly don't look like a very good team right now.
Well, we talked about this when they were 22-10, wondering if they were really that good. You lose 13 of 16, yeah, people are going to doubt, and rightfully so. And as I noted after Wednesday night's win over the Yankees to take 2 out of 3, you're not going to make up for a 2.5-week stretch where you're that bad overnight. But good start to come home, settle things down a little bit, take 2 out of 3 from the Yankees, who've been the best team in the division so far, and just kind of calm things down a little bit. It doesn't mean anything's fixed. All of their issues that they have now are the same issues that they had when they were losing 7 in a row, and frankly, pretty much the same issues that they had when they were 22-10. It's just the end result was better over a significant stretch of time. So we know what this team is typically good at doing. The problem is they haven't been as good in the bullpen. They haven't been as good offensively as they've needed to be, and the starting pitching has been as bad as you feared it could be, sans Dylan Bundy. So that all adds up to a lot of mediocrity at best, and we saw worse than mediocrity over the last 2.5 weeks prior to the start of this series on Monday. So good to see things stabilize a little bit over a 3-game set. They have to continue that now against the Red Sox, but it's clear this team has some issues, and just like we said when they were 22-10, I didn't think they were that good. I knew they weren't that good. They weren't going to be a team that was going to win 100 games or come close to that. At the same time, I know they're not. They weren't as bad as 3-13 over a 2.5-week stretch. But you are what your record says you are in totality. And this team right now, going into this Red Sox series, 3 games over 500, 50 games in, it's okay. It's not great. It's not terrible. They haven't done anything to sabotage their season. It's really good that they got off to the start they did, given the stretch that they just came out of. But it's clear what this team's going to have to do in order to get where they want to go. And at this point, it's fair to ask questions.
I spent a late evening on Wednesday night after the games were over. Everything was off. And I was checking through my recorded DVR stuff, and I found back in the first week of April there was a Miracles from 33rd Street thing that my wife may have taped for me or something. It was when the season started, and it was narrated by Ted Patterson. It was clearly made at the end of Memorial Stadium. There were no video from Camden Yards in it at all, so it was obviously pre-92. And it's all about the pitching and the Orioles and the pitching and Earl Weaver. And even when there are 10, 12 games over 500, it really made me long for it, especially this bad losing streak. The staff they had 4 years ago and 2 years ago, and I know Wei Chan and Miguel Gonzalez will never be, decorated McNally, Palmer, Cuellar, Dobson kind of guys around here. Maybe if they had beaten Kansas City and played better baseball for 2 weeks, 2 Octobers ago, maybe we'd feel differently about that. But there was some level of confidence that for a couple of years we knew who was in the rotation. We knew they were going to survive it. I don't know who survives this. I don't know that next year who is in the rotation for this team. And I know it's early to be talking about next year, but I look at Bundy, the rest of these guys, I don't know where Gausman's going to be. I don't know where Tillman's at, but I know it needs to be better every night in order for the team. There was a thought of 12 games over 5. Well, maybe they're not that good, but maybe Tillman will start to look like Tillman, and Bundy is, and maybe Gausman will turn this around, and maybe they still will. But that is exactly what's going to need to happen, because I don't even think, even if the bats wake up and Trumbo goes Trumbo and Davis earns his money, that they're going to be able to hit their way out of the kinds of pitching that they've had the last 2 weeks.
Well, it certainly needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. But to what you just said, 2012, their starting rotation wasn't all that good. 2014, if you remember, it was really the second half of the year.
Right.
That was the only time over this period of prosperity where they've been the winningest team in the American League since 2012. that was really the only time where you looked 1 through 5 and said, that's a pretty decent starting rotation. Not great, but certainly good enough.
Well, there's nobody in there you were looking to replace. I mean, even at the trading deadline, when you're out getting the Scott Feldmans or whoever you're getting, it doesn't feel so desperate. I mean, for me right now, give me Bundy. You can have all the rest of these guys right now. You can have all of them. I don't need to see another Jimenez start, another Alec Asher start. I mean, none of these guys to me, are going to get it done over their next 20 starts, which is what you're asking. All these guys are going to start 20 games each over the next 100 days. It's not going to be good enough, and I know we talked about that in the offseason, and I don't see the signs of life I need to see from Tillman and Gausman right now.
Well, I think Gausman has been pitching better now. Certainly, can't exactly be thrilled with how he pitched on Wednesday night, especially when he was staked to a 6-run lead to only get through 5 1/3 innings. That's not good enough. But he has made progress from where he was a month ago because his ERA has come down substantially.
Well, he made it to the 6th inning, so let's start with that.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. He wasn't even doing that. So, I'll still take Gausman in that category. Yeah, he needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. Okay, well, Bundy's a given at this point. You hope he continues to pitch like this because he's their only sure thing. I'll still take Gausman because of what he did over the last 3 years, whether it wasn't ace material, but it was certainly good enough to be middle of the rotation starter material. Tillman, that's a tough one because I think you still look at him. He's got moxie. I mean, he's a guy who has been in the rotation for the better part of 5 or 6 years now. And has pitched really well, save for, 2015. But you look at him physically, velocity's down about 2 miles per hour. Was never a dominant, overpowering guy to begin with. So, can he compete with only throwing 90 miles per hour? I think he can, but his margin for error is that much smaller. So I think there's certainly a question of whether he can give you a 3.5 ERA. Now, can he give you a 4 ERA? Might be able to do that, and that's in this day and age, that's not terrible in a starting rotation. But beyond that, it's hard to argue. I mean, I know Wade Miley's ERA looks good, but very little else about him looks good.
By the way, of all the things that I felt like were going to fall apart when they were 12 games over 500, I would have bet anything that Wade Miley wasn't going to win 16 or 18 games here this year. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I looked at the first month and said, yeah, he's getting by on this, but you could see the base runners, you could see the whip, you could see him working out of jams, you could see that he was never going to make it to the 7th or 8th inning. He was never going to give you that kind of night because he wasn't going to conserve pitches the right way. Miley, he was the weak link in the rotation before the season began, and that was including Jimenez at that point. I still would be shocked to see Wade Miley in the rotation in September.
Well, I don't
know who else is there, but yeah,
I hear what you're saying, but one, who else is there, and two, he does have a 3 ERA, and I get it. He's not getting deep in the games for the most part. There have been some exceptions here and there, but I still think Jimenez was still the guy that, to me, could, exactly what's happened, I envision that being a possibility. So, Miley, I thought he would bounce back because the peripherals last year indicated that he had to be better than what he was when he came over from Seattle. But it's certainly a question mark. But I've said this to you over and over. I've said this to you numerous times over the last few years when we've talked about the state of this rotation. I mean, if they can get to a point where they have Bundy, Gausman, can at least look like the guy he did the last 3 years. 3 years, 3.77 ERA over the previous 3 seasons. For all of his shortcomings or not becoming an ace or living up to first-round billing, all of that, guy's a solid starting pitcher for the better part of 3 years. So I'm still going to hold on to that and not just say, well, because of how he's pitched over the first 2 months of the season, that's who he is now, and he can't get better. With Tillman, like I said, does the velocity come back a little bit more? Does he adjust to being a guy who doesn't throw quite as hard? We'll see. Again, he's got experience. He's a pretty savvy guy on the mound. We've seen him pitch successfully when he hasn't necessarily had his best stuff in the past. So that's the big question with him. If they can get 3 guys that they feel good about more often than not when they're going to the hill, and then the last two spots, it might be a revolving door a little bit until you hope you find someone that gives you Miguel Gonzalez-like production or something along those lines. If they can at least get three guys that they feel pretty good about every time they go out to the hill, even if that doesn't, it doesn't mean 3.5 ERA, but they're going to at least give them a chance to win, then I think you're talking about the Orioles being good enough to contend, assuming Zach Britton is back by sometime right before the All-Star break, which all signs, they're saying all signs point to that still being the case, and assuming that the bats do heat up. I mean, as much as we've talked about the starting pitching, we've had this conversation so many different times over the last few years, even when they've made the playoffs, even when they've been good. To me, I still point to the offense relative to expectations, and I'll say I've been just as disappointed in that group because I'm not surprised to see the starting rotation struggle. It's nothing new, but when the offense entering Wednesday, I think, was ranked 20th in the majors in runs scored per game, that's not the formula for how this roster was constructed. And you can point to it being a flawed roster. I get that. I don't disagree, but the bats have to be better. There's no doubt about that. When you're talking about Manny Machado hovering just above the Mendoza line and Mark Trumbo, for the most part, not giving them a whole lot of power, and Chris Davis being really, really good for some short stretches and really, really bad for some longer stretches. You just go down the list, very few guys you can point to and say, that guy's having a really good season. Trey Mancini, certainly. Jonathan Scope, not necessarily a career year, but he's been really solid. Wellington Castillo, when he's been healthy, and he just got placed on the DL again after an unfortunate foul ball to the Caleb Joseph area. He's done a nice job with the bat, no doubt, but you still are looking, anytime you have a team that you're hoping is going to contend, you're looking to have a couple of those guys that have a career year. 2014, it was Nelson Cruz. Steve Pearce in 2014. So, you're looking for at least a couple guys to play above their heads. And then, of course, you need your other big boppers to have a representative season, to do what they're capable of doing. And to this point, we really haven't seen that from this offense. So with all their issues, all their flaws, and an absolutely horrendous 2.5-week stretch, they're still right there in the American League East. They're 3.5 games out, and yeah, you'd like to be in first place, but 3.5 out is your start in June, and given all the issues that they've had and what they look like statistically, I'll still take the entire body of work, realizing that what they've done the last 3 weeks, they have to be much better than.
The starting pitching, now that you start to get a little totality into this and you're a third of the way through this thing, and, I look up, Tillman had 5 starts, Gausman has 12, Jimenez had 8. That's 25 of the 51 games they played where their ERA 6 or higher. That's half the time they're going out and pitching to a 6 ERA. And I haven't even thrown Wilson and Aquino in there, who also started games. So that's actually 27 of the 51 games where the starting pitching 6 or higher. Boy, they're lucky to be where they are, quite frankly. And I think we all knew that because they won some one-run ball games. They slugged it out a couple of times in April. And they had a really kind of a gaudy start. I don't know how they're going to play 10 or 12 games over 500 at any point over the next 110 games.
Well, but that's why they play, right? We could talk about any team looking really, really terrible. You were ready to fire John Gibbons 3 weeks into the season, and now the Blue Jays are back to 500. So and
we're all ready to give Houston a World Series ticket right now,
right.
But it's June. You don't do that, right?
Right. Look at the Cubs, who were completely invincible in 2016, and yet they're under 500 as we turn the calendar to June. So, it's just what your issues are now aren't necessarily going to be your issues 2 months from now, although with the Orioles, certainly I think it's a safe bet to say the starting pitching will remain a question mark. You hope it gets better. You hope that a couple of those guys give them a little more consistency. You mentioned Wei-Yin Chen and Miguel Gonzalez, what they did for them in the past. Both of those guys were unknowns in 2012.
And underappreciated even now that they're gone.
Sure.
They're gone. I really appreciate Miguel Gonzalez because he took the ball every 5th day, and you weren't, wetting yourself on the way to the ballpark on a Wednesday when he was getting the ball thinking like we're going to the bullpen in the 3rd inning tonight,
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. And, that's where they need to start as far as their rotation. It's, what Kevin Gausman's what he gave them Wednesday night, that wasn't very good, but it sure beats the alternative of being knocked out in the second or third inning and completely blowing a 7-1 lead and not getting any results whatsoever. So, it kind of gets to be baby steps. Can these guys consistently start getting them through 5 innings, and then you start talking about 6 innings, and then can it be 6 innings, but you're only giving up 3 runs or fewer? That quality start range. And that's where you kind of have to go. I don't think it's going to get much better than that. I mean, Dylan Bundy has looked great. Is he going to have a sub-3 ERA all year? That's all to ask for a guy who's in his first 4 years as a starter. But, you're hoping while he continues to kind of carry this rotation, you're hoping that Gausman does get a little bit better. And there's plenty of reason to think that he will get better because he's done it for extended periods of time in the past. And, same with Tillman, even with the physical part of it being a question. Miley's had his moments, certainly. I mean, you don't have your moments and somehow happen to have a 3 ERA. I mean, I don't think he's going to continue with that, but, can he be a guy that at least has an ERA, 4.5 for the season? I mean, I've talked about this before. I mean, the formula for this team, assuming their offense gets back in the line with where it's been in the past, and assuming that they get Zach Britton back, and you're not overworking Brock and O'Day, who have both pitched better here of late, and Michael Gibbons continues to give them good innings after he went through that stretch where I think he was overworked a little bit. If the bullpen gets back to being a top 3, top 4 in the American League kind of group, and the offense does what it does, then you can probably get by with the rotation being 8th, 9th, maybe even 10th in starter ERA in the American League. I mean, that's been their formula for the better part of 5 or 6 years. It hasn't gotten them to a World Series, but it's kept them in contention. And I think if they can find that same formula again, then they'll be in it for the long haul. Because the one thing I will say, as much as we look at the American League East right now, look at the Central right now. Not overly impressive. I mean, the Twins, they've been a nice story, but I don't think anyone assumes they're going to run away with anything. You're still waiting for Cleveland to take off. Detroit does not look good. So you look at that division, and then you look at the West, where it's the Astros and everyone else, and maybe the Angels could have been there before Mike Trout is lost for an extended period with the thumb issue. You look at the way that this is setting up in the American League, it's looking like, once again, there's a good chance that both wild cards come from the AL East. So when you keep that in mind, I don't know if it makes it any easier because these are the teams that the Orioles are directly competing with, but at the same time, the Orioles have been really good playing within the division. I mean, you look at their division record; it's much better than it's been against everyone else. So, I guess maybe that's a little bit of a saving grace. But it's very clear if this team's going to get to where they want to go, and that's being in contention, whether it's wild card or division, come mid-September, then they're going to have to pitch much better than we've seen. And to this point, standing at 27-24, knowing that that Zach Britton hasn't been there for most of the season, knowing that Manny Machado is barely above the Mendoza line, knowing some of the other injuries they've had, some of the other underperformers that they've had, you still look at it and say, as much as the rotation scares the hell out of you, I think there are some other things about this team that you can still look at and say, I think that's going to get better at some point here moving forward.
Luke Jones joining us here. He will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards all weekend. The Boston Red Sox are now the next team. And before I get to the Red Sox, talk a little bit about the Yankees. Boy, Tanaka's not a good look, right? I mean, he looks like a different guy. I mean, you talk about Tillman getting banged around a little bit after having so much success. Tanaka was one of those guys, when I saw him pitch 3 years ago, the Yankees bring him over, I'm like, wow, that guy is going to win 20 every year. That guy's going to be a front line. It really is a thin line between where Jake Arrieta used to be and where he is now, right?
Yeah, and where he's regressed a little bit this year compared to what he was 2 years ago. I mean, but Tanaka, it's well documented. He had the partially torn UCL a couple years back. He was he was that rare exception that when you hear about someone having an elbow issue, he didn't wind up having Tommy John surgery. So, that's affected his velocity. I mean, certainly doesn't throw as hard as he did when he came over a few years back. But, up until this season, he'd made it work. Command had been much better. Stuff was better. And, you saw him on Wednesday night threw some breaking balls that were not impressive. And talking about a guy who has to live down in the strike zone, he was either missing a little bit low, and that got him into some deep counts, or he's just a hair up, and that's the difference between a ground ball or a harmless fly ball to the outfield, or the Orioles smoking a double off of him, or Adam Jones hitting a home run. I mean, it is a small margin for error, and we've seen that certainly with Chris Tillman. Maybe he's not the best example because physically, velocity not being where it's been in the past. But Kevin Gausman's a fine example of that. I mean, it's a fine line between pitching how he did last year over the final 2 months and what we've seen for the most part here in 2017. But it is amazing to think. You go into the season, and if someone had told you that Tanaka would have an ERA over 6 and would be as dreadful as he's been, you'd probably say the Yankees aren't going to be doing very well, because the question was about their rotation. But Severino's pitched so well for them. Pineda, Jordan Montgomery wasn't very good on Monday, but he's had his moments. So that rotation, they've kind of had to carry Tanaka. He's been the weak link, and certainly their offense has exploded. But you still would think if the Yankees are going to be this good all season long, and when you have young guys, they're going to have some periods that they're going to struggle this year. I don't think Aaron Judge is going to hit 55 home runs, although the way that guy can hit the baseball, who knows? I mean, I'm really impressed with him wasn't impressed with him at all last year when I saw him get some opportunities for the Yankees. But you would think they're going to need Tanaka to give them some good starts at some point here, because you are talking about a lot of young guys. It's a long season. I think for younger guys who haven't been through it and certainly haven't been through a pennant race, you're more apt to some mental fatigue. So the Yankees, their rotation's been good enough. There's no doubt about that. Their offense has been terrific, but you would still think if they're going to be standing there at the end atop the division, you would think Tanaka's going to have to get straightened out some, because we've been plenty over Gausman and Tillman and Jimenez and Miley, but Tanaka has been more accomplished than any of those guys other than Chris Tillman, maybe. And he's been awful.
Well, then you see the Red Sox come in, and you say, well, where are they? And, Price is finally going to get the ball on Saturday night against Bundy, and it'll be some good pitching over the weekend, or some interesting matchups here. But the Red Sox have certainly been a disappointment as well thus far.
Yeah, they have. They're playing better. Certainly they've surpassed the Orioles' struggles. Certainly allowed them to climb back into second place in this division.
Well, John Farrell was on the hot seat 2 weeks ago. That's about firing him up there, right?
Well, right. I mean,
again,
and it just again speaks to the peaks and valleys of the season. I mean, that sounds wishy-washy, but it's the truth. Again, everyone was ready to leave Toronto for complete dead after the first 2 weeks when they were 2-10, I think it was, and they were really bad for the first 6-7 weeks of the season. But you see what's happened to them. I mean, the Red Sox, the big surprise with them, I think, as much as their rotation, it just scares you on paper, and certainly Sale has pitched really, really well. Eduardo Rodriguez, who we're going to see in the opener, has pitched really, really well. But Price certainly hasn't. He just got back and made his first start on Memorial Day, and we'll see how he holds up with the elbow. I mean, I think they're certainly keeping their fingers crossed in a way, probably way more dramatically than the Orioles are with Chris Tillman at this point.
Well, you got a lot more money involved in him, right? I mean, Mr. Angelos,
exactly.
This is why Mr. Angelos doesn't give pitchers $200 million, because it's June and he's pitched 5 innings.
Well, and that's why a lot of people, not just Peter Angelos, but a lot of people around baseball think those types of contracts for pitchers are generally really bad investments, because that happens a lot. Or they don't pitch like they did over their first 6 or 7 seasons. So, with Price, question mark. Porcello, which, I'll be honest, I'm not shocked to see him come back to earth a little bit. I mean, he's not a guy that wows you. He's never been a guy that piles up a ton of strikeouts. He had a terrific season last year, taking nothing away. But if there was a guy in that rotation that was in line for a little bit of regression, regression to the mean, so to speak, Porcello was kind of the guy that I thought of. Not that he's been awful, but 3-6, 4.21 ERA, certainly not Cy Young material. But you can talk all you want about the pitching, and you still look at that rotation, and assuming Price is at least close to what he's been in the past, and we won't know that until he's out there and making starts consistently every fifth day. But you look at their offense, and as much as we talked about the David Ortiz narrative, and as much as we've talked about that when the Orioles have let a Nelson Cruz or a Nick Markakis go here over the last few years, they've clearly missed David Ortiz, and they've missed his production, obviously. But I think there's also something to be said. As much as I think chemistry and that side of the game can often be overrated, when you're talking about a personality like Ortiz, forget about how we feel about him, how Orioles fans feel about him, or Yankees fans feel about him, or anyone else. But knowing what he meant to that franchise, knowing what he meant to that city, it's not exactly shocking that it's for them to have a little bit of a hangover. But that said, some of those guys that they're counting on to give them more offensively, they're going to need that.
Bradley has stunk this year. I mean, it's Sandoval and Ramirez. They'll talk about that offseason,
Sure.
wasted money forever, and they've had their opportunities. And Ramirez is sort of fair to middling, but they're not hitting the ball the way they were last year. Man, I remember them coming in here this time last year, and they were hitting 295 as a team. It was insane. They were just running around the bases, and without Ortiz in the middle, and now without Pedroia, they're not what maybe the paper lion we thought they were in the offseason, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been to this point, and they still could end up being that. When you have a rotation like they have, and, obviously, Kimbrel has been really, really good. Yeah, I mean, he's been terrific. I mean, he's been as good as he's been at any point in his career, and that's saying something. And
he's pitched 24 innings and has had 9 base runners. It's insane, right?
Well, and the strikeout totals are, it's unbelievable. So, when you look at their pitching, they still very much could be the tiger that completely runs away with this thing. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to the Yankees or the Orioles or the Blue Jays playing better, or even the Rays, who we haven't talked about. And they've quietly been over 500 and have been okay, better than anyone would have thought. But, Boston, to me, still has the greatest potential short term. You can look at the Yankees' big picture and say, my goodness, that team's going to be loaded, and all their prospects aren't even here yet. But, in the short term, to me, you still look at the Red Sox and say, if I'm guessing who's going to win the division, I'm still going to pick them as we're into early June, acknowledging that the Yankees have been really good and have been the class of the division to this point. But if that's going to happen, they need their offense to wake up. You mentioned Bradley. He's been hitting better for them. He was really awful until about 2 weeks ago and started to swing the bat better. But, they need their young guys. They need some of their veterans that they are paying handsomely and have underperformed. They need those guys to step it up, because David Ortiz isn't walking through that door. So it's certainly been a struggle for the Red Sox, way more than they would have expected. But don't we remind everyone, you can't say it's still early when it's June. To me, that excuse runs out at Memorial Day. But we still have over 100 games to play in the season. Still a lot of things can happen, good or bad, for any club. And to me, the Red Sox, as much as it pains me to say this, that's still a team where we still haven't seen their best baseball played.
Orioles are going to see the best from the Red Sox this weekend. 4 games: Rodriguez, Porcello, Price, and Sale. And, of course, Miley, Asher, Bundy, and Tillman this weekend. Saturday will be an interesting one as they're giving bobbleheads away, and they're not giving them. You're paying for them. They're just distributing them after you pay for them. Bundy and Price on Saturday night should be a good one. Tillman and Sale, if you want to see Chris Sale pitch, maybe he'll cut the jerseys up on Sunday. We'll see how that goes. Luke will be out at the ballpark all weekend. He is Luke at WNST.net. Of course, Baltimore Luke. If there's any breaking news, you'll get that first, of course, on the WNST tech service. And it feels like every day someone's coming up and down, and obviously this hideous injury to Castillo the other day. But we're holding on. Birds got the Pirates coming in early part of next week, and then they have a quick makeup with the Nationals in the middle of next week. They had a week where they had 2 days off. Now they have 1 day off, and then they take off for the road for New York and the Chicago White Sox later on in the month. But all eyes on Camden Yards this weekend now. Lacrosse is over. No Caps, no Wizards. Ravens doing a little downtime here before some mandatories in a couple of weeks. But life is good here in June. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel. And, of course, everything platforms in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.